Mere conservatism.
Alrighty. Hello, David Perry.
Hey, Cleve Walker. Just having a nice cup of Joe here with my, I got some cricket powder in there for protein. Just kind of mix it in.
So David comes in the studio talking about bugs for food, and you are doing that because of what?
You can buy them live at Walmart in the fishing section, believe it or not. You can just buy crickets.
But that's a bait, though, right?
I thought it was just like a snack. You just kind of poppers or something.
Well, if we leave it up to the folks and intelligentsia in Davos, we'll all be eating bugs at some point.
Yeah, they're better for the environment. Now, I got to be honest with you. You know, if people want to eat bugs, that's fine. A lot of cultures do eat bugs. We don't do that. We don't do that in the West. I don't particularly want to do it. Certainly not as a main part of my meal. I have eaten cricket as like a novelty before. You know, they sell these little packs.
I think I remember that
of ranch flavored crickets. I think it's kind of funny. But the reason I hate it is because the powers that be want us to do it because of the carbon footprint, which I think is stupid. And so that's why I don't want to do it. And by the way, you got to know the folks at Davos, they were not eating crickets. Mm-hmm. They were not eating bugs, trust me. They were eating nice food.
I'm sure. Although some of the food they call nice, like escargot, I probably would not be able to eat any more than I can eat a bug.
Yeah.
But that's just me, okay? Not a snail person. Well, we're going to touch on them again because, again, the situation in Davos, that's just a visible sign of the elitist movement all around the world, dead set on telling us what to eat, not to eat, what to do or not to do with our families, et cetera, et cetera. So
these are people really, Cleve, that they rule over you in their own minds. They believe they have the right to. That's the difference between somebody being just like a really smart person who is successful and runs a business or whatever, provides a service, and a person that thinks that because of their intelligence, they think they have and wealth, they think they have the right to rule your life. Mm-hmm. And the folks in Davos, they think that they already are in charge of the world, that they're already running the world. And there are elitists in our own country, mm-hmm. some of them are in government, doing the same thing. Elizabeth Warren was out this week. I don't know if you saw her campaign.
I did.
Because she's talking about the debt ceiling increase. And she was out there saying, you know what? We wouldn't even need a debt ceiling increase if the Republicans hadn't spent $2 trillion on tax cuts. And whenever somebody says something like this, my head almost wants to turn like inside out almost. You ever have that feeling where you're just, wah?
Yeah.
It frustrates me so much because somebody like Elizabeth Warren, she's an elitist. She thinks that all the money in the country belongs to the government and that they give the money to you to use. I don't know who makes them talk like tax cuts cost money. Mm-hmm. A tax cut is not an expenditure. That's not something you spent money on. And the only reason people like her speak like that is because they think that everything belongs to the government. That really is the reason why they act like that.
And the reason they feel that way and think that is because they believe the government knows better how to dispense that money than you do. You do not know how to handle your own money. The government has to handle it for you. Otherwise, where would we be?
And I refuse to allow them to make it seem like the government letting me keep the money that I earn is benevolence from them.
Right.
That's what they act like.
Well, I wish Republicans would learn that, though, because we need to say things like that. Matter of fact, I don't even like just saying tax cuts. That's good, and that's what it is. But I would like to say things like, we want you to keep more of your money. That's what the tax cut is.
Yeah.
We want you to have more power over your money than the government does. Don't just say those words. Say what they mean, because obviously, David, a lot of folks don't know what it means.
I think you're right, and the language we use when we talk about things affects how we think about it.
Definitely.
And
no arguments there.
And so, the words and stuff, they're just symbols to mean things. And so when we use certain words or don't use certain words to talk about something, it shapes how we think about it. And that's why the Democrats, they say tax cuts cost money, because that's framing the way you think about tax cuts and money and all that stuff. It's wrong. It's totally dishonest, and it just frustrates me to no end.
Well, speaking of that, now our nation just hit a staggering spending cap of $31.4 trillion. $31.4 trillion. Economists are now saying the U.S. is likely to reach what they call the drop-dead date to pay its bills sometime later in the summer. And then they're going to have to raise it so they can borrow more money. David, that is probably one of the most sickening things when you realize it. Stop to think about that. And the reason they do it, in my humble opinion, is because they win both ways. Not only do they get a lot of money to give to their favorite causes and to their allies, they funnel money like crazy to folks who support them. But even if this busts the economy wide open, it still favors them, because then they have a populace totally helpless and dependent upon them on a problem they created.
Well, and so much of the spending, they want to act like it's a revenue problem. That's one thing that what Elizabeth Warren is getting at, is that we're just not bringing enough money. Let's be honest. The money that the government spends has no relationship to the money that they bring in with taxes. Zero relationship whatsoever. It hasn't for a very, very long time. Those two things are extremely unrelated. There have been plenty of times in the recent past where the deficit will go up when we have record revenue.
Right.
Like the Trump tax cuts, by the way. There was record revenue during that time.
That's true.
After the tax cuts.
That's true. Good point.
It's not about those. In other words, just separate those two things in your mind, okay? The revenue we bring in has nothing to do with the money we spend. And the reason we have deficits is because of the money we spend. And unfortunately, a lot of the money we spend is not on things that are budgeted necessarily, like defense spending, and even this wasteful spending we talk about, like Michelle Obama Trail in Atlanta we talked about a couple of weeks ago. That stuff is wasteful and it's frustrating. But our biggest issue are entitlement spending.
Right.
And people get mad when you call Social Security an entitlement. It's just a label, okay? So don't get offended by calling it that.
It's funny how just saying the word can maybe raise somebody's blood pressure.
Yeah.
Entitlement. No. I have that coming.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Well, yeah, you put money in, but the problem is that you didn't put money into an account and it sit there in a lockbox, as Al Gore would say, to wait for you. No, that money went from your pocket to somebody else's pocket. It is just a transfer of wealth. Social Security is a problem. The Medicare, Medicaid, these are programs that cost a lot of money. That's most of our spending.
Right.
And it's not going anywhere. And any attempt to reform these programs is met with fierce opposition by the Democrats and demonization of Republicans for not wanting us to go over a financial cliff.
So prediction. I have my thoughts on this. What's going to happen later on? They're saying they got to do it by June. If there is no deal reached on the debt limit and we go into quote-unquote default, who wins in public opinion, the Democrats or the Republicans?
You saying if it happens?
Yes.
Democrats win.
Okay. Because I agree with that.
Yeah, Democrats win. That's why it's not going to happen.
Well, but still, here's the thing.
Government will not default.
When our side says things as if we can do that, literally go ahead and let that happen and still win the argument. And a lot of us are saying that. And really, in the real world, that ought to be true. In the real world, we ought to have a populace that understands that we need to stop right now, that we need to have a stop to all additional spending. But we don't have that.
No, we have a real, go ahead.
And that's the problem right there.
We have a real problem, Cleve, because almost everybody, if you were to take a poll, almost everybody realizes that the debt and the deficit is a huge problem and that we need to do something about it. Very few people actually want to cut spending. That's a problem.
And certainly not Democrats.
Everybody, certainly not Democrats. Everybody knows that we have a problem with spending and that we're in trouble with the debt. Nobody thinks the debt is a good thing. Well, hardly anybody. but nobody wants to stop spending. It's like Americans, we are addicted to it. We can't stop. And a lot of this, because if you start talking about, for instance, reforming Social Security, people get really mad about that, and they should.
Oh, my goodness.
And they should. You know why? Because you have been hosed by the government.
Right.
With Social Security for years.
I agree.
I have been hosed just like you have with Social Security. The problem is Social Security, it's a bad investment. You would do much better. So, Cleve, how old are you? You're like 185 years old or something like that.
I'm 68.
Plus 200? So anyway, you've been paying all this money in. If you had, over the years, been able to take that same amount of money and invest it in a 401k or a Roth IRA or something like that, you'd be doing much better right now than you're going to do when you start pulling Social Security, if you haven't already. So you have been hosed by the government, but at this point, it's like a bait and switch. How do you stop now? Because now it's likely that there's gonna be people that feel that they got the shaft in this situation. I've said for a long time they need to just get rid of Social Security and make it welfare instead. If people need help in their old age, it ought to be means tested. It ought to just be welfare, and stop taking money from me. I've been paying into Social Security since I was 16 years old. I don't want to do that. I would rather have that money right now.
Well, that's because you're thinking like a capitalist. And remember, we found out that capitalists are bad, okay? You're thinking like, if I have more of my own money, I can invest it in ways that would be more profitable for me and eventually more profitable for the economy, because then I'm going to have more money that's disposable cash. I can buy, I can do whatever I want to do. So it helps everybody. But that's not the vision that the progressives have created for a populace that thinks literally you cannot run out of money because all the government has to do is just print more. There are people who believe that, David.
They're talking about minting $1 trillion coin. Have you heard that?
Yes.
It's crazy. But again, the Social Security problem is a really big problem, and that kind of spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those types of things, that's what's driving our debt. Yeah, it's growing. The amount that we have to pay in that is growing and growing and growing as a percentage of our GDP or whatever, and it is a real problem. So people talk about scaling back on spending on certain things, which they should do. But you're not going to solve the problem unless you solve the Social Security problem. You're just not.
Absolutely. And now, here's how the progressives have got us. When I say us, this country. This is one of the reasons by the movement for so-called reparations. Reparations, things like guaranteed universal income and things of that nature, will end up doing what Social Security has done. If we get those put in place, they will never be removed. They will increase spending out of the wazoo to where it becomes a permanently ensconced thing in our system, and it will buy a vast swath of the population for the Democrat Party. We get reparations, we get universal incomes, like California is already trying to set the blueprint for right now, and they have voters who will never, never, ever vote for somebody who's going to, quote unquote, take away their money.
Yeah,
think about that.
You're right. Government programs, new ones get created, but they never go away.
And that's the purpose of it. It's power, and they know they're buying power and influence when they use taxpayer dollars, which, by the way, is your money and my money. And it's one of the reasons, by the way, and again, we're not just talking fiscally. It's one of the reasons why I hate abortion so much. Not only do I find it to be morally repugnant and wrong, and as a Christian, it's actually the sin of murder, but because of them, I'm paying for it.
You're
I'm
involved.
Yes, I'm involved. I'm culpable, not against my will. I'm paying for it. I'm also paying now for people to get transgender surgeries, gender-affirming surgeries. You and I are paying for that. So not only do I stand against it on the face of it that it's wrong, but they're using money that belongs to the citizens, belong to me, to enable people to carry out some of these terrible things that are now really destroying our culture. So that gets me.
Yeah. And, I don't think that those things are right to do. But those specific things shouldn't be done, period. But things like that, the government should not be in the business of doing a lot of things they are. It should be, if people need funding or need help doing things, there should be private nonprofits that fund that stuff.
Who are much more efficient than government agencies in doing that. Okay, we got nonprofit food banks and other places that far surpass any kind of government social services in helping the poor. So enable them to do it by more great tax breaks and adding to the nonprofit tax breaks. Encourage that kind of giving. But the problem, David, is that kind of giving does not give them power and influence.
They don't get their cut.
Thank you.
They want the money laundered through the government so they can get their cut.
I would love it I would love it somehow the Republicans could get to the point where we could audit, for example, what is going to the Ukraine. Okay. A lot of money is going to that country. And
now tanks.
Yeah, and now tanks. Now, whether you agree with that or not is another question. Maybe for some reason you do. That's okay. I can accept that. But to say we can just write a blank check, literally, and with no end in sight, supply a country with a war that we don't have any idea when it's going to end, and nobody gets a chance to look and see if the dollars are going where they're supposed to go, that's one of the biggest scams that I've ever heard.
Yeah, we got a proxy war going on with very little oversight from Congress.
None.
And, none, if any.
Right.
And maybe you can justify it, but one of my issues with the government when it comes to, the Ukrainian war is a good example, but you've heard me say stuff like this over and over again, is just be honest with me. Yeah. Just tell me the truth about why you want to do this. If you think that it's in America's interest to take the opportunity to weaken Russia militarily, to have them spend all their country's resources in Ukraine, and so because of that, you're going to spend money to help that happen. Look, I'd rather spend money than lives. So, we're not there doing it. If we need to weaken Russia, it's better than us sending troops to go do something. Make the argument, and maybe I'll agree with you, and maybe I won't. Maybe I'll at least understand it, even if I don't agree with it. But they don't do that. 9 months ago, Joe Biden was refusing to allow MiGs jets to go to Ukraine.
Right.
The only thing that America was going to do is they were going to allow NATO to use Ramstein Air Base in Germany.
I remember that.
As to have the MiGs, the airplanes go through, the jets to go through, so Ukraine could use them against Russia. And Joe Biden said, no, we're not going to let them do that because we don't want to escalate with Russia.
Right.
9 months later, we're sending 30 tanks, American tanks, to Ukraine. And I said 9 months ago we ought to send the jets. Mm-hmm. I'm not even somebody that's saying we shouldn't do this.
But it's really going to be doing something.
What I don't understand is that 9 months ago you said no jets. I said we should send the jets. But you didn't want to escalate. And now, billions later, billions and billions and billions of dollars later, now we're also sending tanks. I'm just like, what happened 9 months ago? We didn't want to escalate. No, but my point is they're not telling us the truth about why we're doing this and why it's in our interest to do it. Just be honest with us.
Well, let's understand something, too. Biden and his family are totally corrupt and somehow involved in many of the situations that we're putting money into right now, even into the Ukraine. It's that same thing we call slippery slope. A proxy war can easily become a war outright, not just a proxy war. And that, unfortunately, is the direction we're going in right now. So there's that. But
and our country is so mixed up on our alliances and what we're supposed to be doing. Joe Biden, just like Obama did, wants to play nice with Iran or be nice to Iran and be friends with Iran. But Iran and Russia are allies. So we're going to be against Russia, but for Iran.
Which is for Russia and still funneling money to them.
So that's a conflict there. And why are we even going to be on the same side as Iran? I always thought that when Trump was president, we were on the right side of alliances.
I think so.
I always thought that with Donald Trump, we were on the right side. We weren't partnered with anybody that I thought was really, really bad. Obviously, Saudi Arabia is always an issue. That's one of those things where you in foreign policy, you do sometimes have to hold your nose when certain people that you deal with. But he was on the side of Iran. He was good with Europe, although he made them pay their fair share. He was hard on Russia. He was hard on Iran. He was hard on North Korea, hard on China. He was hard on all the right people and worked with all the right people, in my opinion. So with Biden, it's not like that. It's the opposite almost.
Another difference with President Trump was, again, because Trump was not and is not a globalist, unlike Biden, who wants to do everything in concert with other countries. In other words, America is not leading, it's more or less following, sort of like what Obama was doing,
leading from
behind. And so they're part of this global thing, and Trump didn't think that way. His thing was, what's best for America?
We're the big dog, we're going to act like it.
Right, but their thing is, how can we fit in and go along with the global perspective? Because ultimately, and again, here comes Cleve sounding like a conspiracy person, ultimately, this is all about establishing global governance. Ultimately. And the way they're handling this war, to me, the only way I can explain it is this is the great opportunity in their minds to bring everything in line for the global governments that Davos has dreams about.
Could be. Well, I feel really bad for Ukraine because I feel like they're getting just, they're sacrificing their lives and their country.
I have nothing against them per se.
They're being used by the United States. I mean, that's how it seems, and I feel bad for them for that. And I'm sure they're grateful for the support and for the help. I'm sure that they would want more, and their president comes and asks for more and all that stuff. And I don't blame him for doing that. I would do the same thing if I were him. But it just feels like we're giving them just enough to string Russia along because we're using them to deplete Russia's military might. And in the meantime, Ukraine and their people, they're going through the meat grinder.
And everybody suffers, again, because of their vision of a world under the thumb of elites who know better. Real quick thing, because this guy, I try to keep an eye on Republicans who could eventually be running for president. And Ron DeSantis is still, in my eyes, anyway. Boston Globe opinion columnist Renee Graham is lashing out against DeSantis over what she describes as his fear of American history. She's slamming DeSantis' decision to keep out African American Studies AP course out of his state's high schools because that includes CRT.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so she's really mad. But he said this course on Black history, he says one of the lessons is about queer theory. It's one of the topics. He says, what's that got to do with anything in Black history?
Well, I was going to ask because I don't know if you know this listening to Mere Conservatism, but Cleve is black.
Yes.
So
for all 68 years of my life.
Yeah. And so I was going to ask you, Cleve, tell me about how queer history, plays into black culture.
But it's
Explain
funny you mention
that to me.
It's funny you mention that because I have talked to other black men in particular who are not conservative, not Republican, but many of them say they have noticed a push to get blacks to be more identified with the gay movement for years. They've noticed that push, and for many it's a big turnoff, as it should be. So I do believe there's an effort to conflate the two, because if you can conflate, quote-unquote, black history and black civil rights with the gays, which they have done, then boom, you push an agenda that the original civil rights movement had nothing about in it. So DeSantis is saying, no, well, this is not going to happen.
Because to the left, it's all the same struggle. Because to the left, it's actually not about being black.
Not at all.
It's not about being gay, even. It's
or
not
even
about
being a
being
woman
trans.
or a man.
Those things are a vehicle to tear down our society and our culture.
Right.
That's all it is. And so, if there's a class or a race struggle between black and white America, they will latch on to the black cause, and they will use that to tear down society as we know it. Martin Luther King Jr., as a black leader, as a civil rights leader, appealed to the ideals of the founding of our country.
He did.
He was, and as did Frederick Douglass, as you know very well, as being a Frederick Douglass reenactor.
Right.
I don't know if people know that about you, but these are men that appealed to the founding documents of our nation. They believed in the Declaration of Independence. That's not the same as the left, who wants to tear down those ideals. And they have, in the same way, the left has latched on to gay rights and whatever you call it, okay? They don't care about these people.
No, not at all.
Again, it's just a vehicle. That's why it's all the same. Now it's white people versus the world, basically, because it's everybody that's not white or straight versus white people, because all these things represent something other than what they really are, is what I'm saying. Whiteness represents the society and structure, the way we know it's Western culture and all that stuff.
And that's evil.
And that's evil.
Yes.
And everything else is just a vehicle to try to tear that down and destroy it.
It's that simple. It really is. It sounds too simple, but they need a boogeyman. And the boogeyman to create their movement in their mind is the white power structure. And therein lies their excuse for being able to do anything to topple that great evil.
And they come at it from a lot of different ways. I mean, you got the fat phobia, the fat shaming thing. Mm-hmm. You and I were talking about that a little bit a second ago, but that's a similar thing. It's another tactic. They're coming at Western ideals of beauty.
Right.
And they're attacking that. They want to attack it from every angle they can. And so they come up with these aggrieved people groups, fat, or you're a person of color, or you have a different gender expression or whatever, and all of that is only designed to tear down structures. That's it.
Great summation of the problem, David. And again, if folks want to hear this discussion again on this or any topic on mere conservatism.
Yeah, we're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. Make sure you subscribe on those platforms. You can also find us on Facebook. You can find us on YouTube as well. And we'd love to have you comment and give us a follow.
And even though we painted a kind of a dire circumstance about where things stand, we still are not done yet. So from David Perry and me, Cleve Walker, keep the faith. It's not over with yet.